Ayano Kuji Shizuko was an ordinary student at an agricultural high school. One day, while walking home from school, she suddenly lost consciousness. When she opened her eyes, the world around her resembled the Sengoku period. It was a morning in mid-April, and she had been reading late into the night. The memory of dreaming about being beheaded by Nobunaga still lingered. The era itself felt as vivid and exciting as expected, enough to leave her restless and unable to sleep after reading those books. At school, her thoughts drifted again to history. If she were ever to serve a warlord, it would never be Nobunaga. Her daydream was interrupted when classmates reacted to her notebooks and belongings, pointing out how many she had and complaining about the smell of her strange armor. She shut them down without engaging further. Later, the teacher announced that the 5th period was cancelled. Shizuko was caught off guard and asked about the seeds she had brought for class. The teacher apologized and suggested another time. Shizuko made it clear that she had gone out of her way to buy them. With classes ending early, a classmate invited her to karaoke. Shizuko declined, explaining that she needed to speak with her grandfather. She wanted to head home as soon as possible now that she could leave early. Another student commented that doing farm work even at home was respectable, noting her interest in both agriculture and history. After leaving school, Shizuko stopped by a bookstore and bought a volume titled Ancient to Modern Weapon Catalog. She remarked on how harsh the contents were, then nearly forgot about it as she continued walking. As she moved along, she complained about her older sister, wondering why she could not buy her own book. Then water splashed onto the ground. What happened after that remained unclear. Until the moment she opened her eyes again, her memory completely cut out. Even afterward, whenever she tried to think back, tears would fall for reasons she could not explain. She regained consciousness in shock. Before her was a lake surrounded by dense trees, with no buildings in sight. She tried to understand where she was. She retraced her steps in her mind. School had ended early, she went to the bookstore, and she walked for a while after that. Nothing explained her current surroundings. Footsteps approached nearby. 2 men noticed her presence and remarked on how strange she looked. Shizuko wondered if this was part of some kind of filming. That assumption shattered when she saw one of the men move as if to seize her. Panic took over and she ran, but her backpack was grabbed and yanked back, sending her crashing to the ground. The man immediately pinned her down, restraining her before she could react further. Before anything else could happen, a blade pierced through his back. Blood burst from his chest, spraying forward. Shizuko froze in shock. A soldier stood behind the fallen man, having delivered the strike. He condemned the act as theft and declared that such behavior would not be tolerated within their lord's territory. The soldier took note of her unusual clothing and questioned her origins. Shizuko froze, the weight of the situation finally settling in. This was no reenactment or staged event. It was real. Another presence interrupted the scene. A mounted man arrived, drawing the soldiers' attention, and they addressed him as their lord. Shizuko noticed the crest he bore, a katana with a golden guard. His attire was eccentric, unlike the others, and his presence carried a force that dominated the area. From that alone, she understood there was only one figure in history who fit this image. She identified him as Oda Kazusanosuke Saburo, Taira no Asen Nobunaga. The man dismounted and immediately leveled his sword toward her face, confronting her reckless familiarity. The gravity of what she had done struck her at once. In this era, addressing someone by their given name was a grave breach of etiquette. Saburo was his childhood name, Kazusanosuke an alias, Oda his clan name, and Nobunaga his given name, reserved only for intimates and superiors. Realizing her mistake, Shizuko bowed fully to the ground and begged forgiveness. Nobunaga returned his blade to his side. Under normal circumstances, he would have killed her on the spot, but her strange appearance had caught his interest. He demanded that she identify herself. Shizuko struggled to respond, her voice unsteady, before giving her name as Ayanakuji Shizuko. Nobunaga questioned whether she was Nanban. She affirmed it, though confusion and fear muddled her thoughts, especially after being reprimanded for speaking his given name. Even after being asked directly, she no longer felt certain what the correct response was. Nobunaga examined her closely. Her hair was trimmed in an unfamiliar way. Her clothes followed no known fashion, and the materials themselves were foreign. His attention shifted to the bag she carried, and he asked if it also belonged to her. When she confirmed it did, he ordered her to raise her face. When asked again who she was, Shizuko met his gaze only briefly before bowing once more. Overwhelmed by his presence, she described herself as insignificant, nothing more than an ordinary townsperson. Nobunaga pressed further, asking where she came from. She answered Nayanamoto, only to be corrected that they were already in Hinamoto. Flustered, she amended her statement, claiming she had been raised in Nanban. At that moment, a soldier reported that something unusual had been found inside her bag. Nobunaga took the object into his hand. It was her smartphone. He asked her to explain what it was. Shizuko identified it as a mirror, silently relieved that it was powered off, knowing that its activation would only deepen suspicion. Nobunaga studied the device intently, his interest clearly captured by the strange object now resting in his grasp. Shizuko suddenly remembered the book still inside her bag, the ancient to modern weapon catalog. The thought of it being discovered sent a chill through her. Nobunaga watched her closely, noting the shift in her behavior, and judged it suspicious. A soldier suggested extracting the truth by force. Her body trembled as the threat closed in. When a spear was leveled toward her face, panic overtook her. She desperately tried to stop them, insisting that she could be of use. She explained that she had studied agriculture. The soldiers reacted with confusion. Agriculture alone seemed insignificant. Nobunaga silenced them and turned his attention back to her. He questioned whether this knowledge also came from Nanban technology. She immediately affirmed it and explained that increased productivity would lead to a richer land. A stronger economy would support population growth, strengthen military power, and reduce the risk of peasant uprisings. That answer caught Nobunaga's interest. He recognized value in her words and decided he wanted her abilities. Relief washed over Shizuko as the immediate danger passed. Nobunaga declared that from that moment on, she would serve him. Leaving his side would mean death. Her life would be spent working solely for his sake. The terms were absolute. Shizuko realized that this command might be more terrifying than torture. Later, within Nobunaga's palace, objections were raised. During the meeting, Shizuko sat quietly as doubts were voiced about her presence. Concerns were raised about her being a woman and a strange outsider. Nobunaga responded with open fury, striking down the objection and dismissing outdated customs. Usefulness alone mattered to him. Whether woman or child, anyone with value would be used. Anyone without it would be discarded. He stated that Ayanokuji Shizuko possessed Nanban agricultural technology. If she proved useless, she would be thrown away without hesitation. Orders were given to prepare new clothing for her. Shizuko closed her eyes as attention lingered on her. The weight of their stares made her uneasy, and a dull pain settled in her stomach. Soon after, Nobunaga summoned her and issued a task without delay. There was a village that had failed to pay even half of its annual tax for several years. Each year, conditions worsened, until only ruins remained. Nobunaga assigned Shizuko to this place. Using Nanban technology, she was to become the village's chief and restore it through an abundant harvest. The order left Shizuko stunned, struggling to grasp what she had just been entrusted with. In the third month of 1565 under the old calendar, Shizuko was formally introduced to the villagers as their new chief. The announcement was met with disbelief, as many struggled to accept that a young girl had been placed in charge of their village. The man overseeing the introduction made it clear that resistance would not be tolerated, stating plainly that refusal would result in the village being destroyed. Morisanza Manioshinari stood beside her. At first glance, he appeared to be an ordinary, aging man, yet his reputation told a different story. He was known as one of Nobunaga's most trusted retainers, someone who had even been entrusted with guarding Nobunaga's castle. Faced with his presence and authority, the villagers lowered themselves to the ground and declared that they had no objections. Morisanza conveyed that his lord held high expectations for Shizuko and instructed her to apply herself properly so she might one day stand before them. His demeanor left no room for doubt. Shizuko recognized the weight of a true Sengoku-era commander in him and responded with compliance. She was then informed that this village and its provisions were part of her stipend, and that several soldiers would remain behind. Any trouble could be addressed through them, though it was clear they would also be watching closely. As Morisanza departed, Shizuko watched him go and felt a fleeting desire to return to where she came from. She quickly dismissed the thought, knowing there was no benefit in lingering on it. For now, she would do what she could. She had brought with her seeds strengthened through modern farming techniques and selective breeding, giving her confidence that she could at least fulfill this simple order from Nobunaga. As she observed the villagers more closely, she noticed how thin they all were, and how few children there seemed to be. Improving everyone's diet became her immediate priority. She then introduced herself properly, stating her name and acknowledging her inexperience while expressing her intention to work together with them. With Nanban technology and the seeds she carried, she set her sights on achieving an abundant harvest, and she bowed respectfully. Her greeting was met with mixed reactions. An elderly woman smiled warmly, and a teenage girl offered a polite response. However, a man soon questioned why they should listen to a woman at all, and several older men shared his dissatisfaction. Shizuko was taken aback, reminded of how women in this era were denied rights and treated as lesser beings. They were often isolated, used as tools for political marriages, and scorned for speaking out, even though history had also seen women who defied these norms without hesitation. One woman among the villagers spoke up, urging the men to show proper respect to their new chief. A man snapped back, insisting that women and children should remain silent. The woman countered by pointing out that without Shizuko's arrival, the village would have already been destroyed. The man dismissed this, questioning what someone so young could possibly do. Shizuko glanced toward the guards, sensing that they understood the situation clearly. One of the men declared that this year they would act on their own terms, and he and the others walked away. Shizuko remained with the women, watching them leave. One of the older women advised her to ignore the stubborn men and focus on moving forward with those willing to work. Shizuko realized that only 10 women and 3 men remained. In an era without machines, losing most of the male labor weighed heavily, and their decision to walk away had been unforgiving. For the moment, she focused on assessing the village's condition. She surveyed the area and counted 10 households, a total population of 30 people, and only 2 cows. As she examined the land, her expectations were confirmed. The soil was poor, and without compost, cultivation would be difficult. Uneven patches of ground were scattered throughout the fields, adding to the problem. Nearby, the remaining men worked the soil while questioning whether there was any plan for the year at all. They admitted there was none. Shizuko approached them and asked whether these fields yielded less than others. The men dismissed her involvement, insisting that women should not interfere. She pointed out that the sloped terrain caused rainwater to wash nutrients into the river, weakening the soil. One of the men abruptly threw waste directly onto the field. Shizuko reacted immediately, stating that spreading it as it was would not work and warning that it would attract pests and damage the root. The man brushed it off, claiming the crops had simply been bad. She explained that it needed to be turned into compost first, but the man responded harshly and ordered her to leave. Standing back and observing the field, Shizuko understood the situation clearly. With so few willing hands and no cooperation from the men, progress would be limited. She took stock of what she still had at her disposal. If her classes had not been suspended, she might have had nothing at all. She carried seeds for pumpkin, sweet corn, tomatoes, kamatsuna, and onions, along with sugarcane seedlings. She also had 3 types of sweet potatoes, Biniazuma, Anuamo, and Satsumemo, along with her cell phone, an annual charger, a medium-sized knife, and a small supply of snacks. Judging by the distance and direction from Kamakiyama Castle, she concluded that this village lay in Owari Province, corresponding to the western part of modern-day Aichi Prefecture. With that in mind, she considered her next steps carefully. After some time, villagers returned with the tub she had requested. Shizuko thanked them and instructed that it be filled with soil first. Once prepared, crops would be planted inside. As she explained the process, the villagers watched in visible amazement. Their reaction made it clear that even basic medicinal or agricultural knowledge had not yet spread here. She briefly wondered whether her presence alone had already altered history, but she also knew that refusing to act would have meant her own execution. She chose to believe that preventing starvation and malnutrition could not be wrong. The next thing they will do is they will make a compost. The villagers are not sure what it is. She explained that when they mix this in a soil, it'll make the crops grow more easily. She instructed them not to scatter waste directly onto the field. When mixed with materials like straw and rice husks, it would become an effective fertilizer. After mixing, it needed to be left to sit for a time. Once that was done, the remaining soil could be tilled. She acknowledged that the work would be difficult, especially for the women, and expressed her gratitude for any help they could provide. Shizuko spent the entire day tending the soil and organizing what little could be done. When night fell, she stayed at the Ume household. As she looked over the meal prepared for her, she realized the situation was far worse than she had first imagined. Even the rice from her stipend had already been distributed among everyone. During the meal, she explained what kind of place Nanban was, describing its convenient technology, the polluted air, and the danger posed by iron horses. The woman listening to her reacted with surprise, finding it to be a frightening-sounding land. As Shizuko lay down to rest, she noticed that there was no futon prepared. She remembered that futons would not become widespread until the Meiji era. Before falling asleep, her thoughts drifted quietly. She missed her futon. She wanted to eat more. She wanted to take a bath. She wanted to see more of the castle. Thinking of her grandfather, she wondered if he was worried about her. The next morning, she told everyone that the day would be spent continuing to dig and prepare the soil. She worked with all her strength. The food remained plain. There was still no bath and no futon. Without the men's help, progress was slow. At this pace, completing her task seemed unlikely. This routine continued for several days. Shizuko grew visibly exhausted. The villagers noticed and checked on her condition. Around that time, the women were surprised to see how much the plants had already grown. One of the men questioned what they were, and the explanation spread that these were Nanban plants that caused crops to grow quickly. The woman pressed the man on whether he would finally listen to the village chief, but he refused. Later, out in the fields, the men spoke among themselves. They acknowledged that Shizuko had cultivated crops they had never seen before, and that they seemed to grow at an unusual speed. One of them recalled that she had accurately identified which fields suffered from poor harvest. Another admitted that she appeared to know many things. Even so, one man remained firm in his stance, stating that he did not want a woman serving as village chief. That same day, Shizuko announced that they would begin increasing the number of seedlings from that point forward. The villagers were confused by what Shizuko meant. She explained the method step by step. The plant would first be split along one side, then left under the sun for about a quarter of the day. As it dried, it would wither slightly. Once it shriveled, it would begin spreading horizontally, and soon after, it would take root. Through this process, a single seedling could become 3, and the cycle could be repeated until they had enough. One of the men happened to overhear the explanation. He caught the woman remarking that even Nanban techniques sounded impossible, and he reacted with quiet satisfaction, convinced his doubts were justified. Shizuko responded calmly, stating that it did not matter if they believed she had deceived them. She asked only that they try it for themselves. When asked where she was going, she said she would return shortly. The woman smiled and agreed, urging her to come back quickly. As Shizuko walked away, one of the guards noticed her and questioned her destination. She answered that she was looking for something she had lost. Being someone out of place in this era, she wondered if returning to where she had first awakened might send her back. The thought proved futile. She could not even find her sister's book. Her thoughts shifted to the villagers. Everyone was thin. If she were to disappear, the village would be destroyed. Under Nobunaga, circumstances would not be considered. The villagers would simply be erased. With that realization, she accepted that there was no other path forward. Back at the fields, the results became visible. The villagers were stunned. A teenage girl noted that the outcome matched exactly what the chief had said. The plants had truly multiplied. The men were equally shocked. From only a few seedlings, the growth had spread rapidly. The crop was sweet potato, a plant that would be introduced to Japan toward the end of the 16th century. Known for its high nutritional value and ability to grow even in infertile soil, it had saved lives during times of famine. These seeds, refined through selective breeding and improved cultivation techniques, were now beginning to alter this era. When night fell, the modest meal and the hard bed left Shizuko slightly unsettled. Bathing, even in a limited form, felt important. As she tried to clean herself with a damp cloth, a group of men suddenly entered the room. She was startled by their presence. The men apologized and explained their position. As things stood, they could not see how the future would unfold, but this Nanban technology seemed worth placing their hopes on. Shizuko listened as they spoke. They made it clear that while they would follow her guidance regarding the technology, they still did not recognize her as the village chief. Another remark followed, crude and careless, suggesting they had assumed she was a man. The moment ended abruptly, and the men left. The next day, Shizuko stood before the fields once more. As she looked over the growing crops, she felt that there might finally be a faint light at the end of the tunnel.
Quick break. Like and subscribe if you appreciate the work that goes into this manga.
By the 5th month of 1565, 2 months had passed since Shizuko arrived in the village. With the men joining in, the work on developing the fields moved forward without delay. The seeds she had brought from the future grew steadily once planting was finished. Shizuko stood by the field, recognizing the value of being able to use farmland freely. When she was called over to help draw water, she agreed, while one of the men struggled with the task and asked her to fix it instead. The scene reminded her of the Nanban upbringing she was often associated with, and of the reality that this was still the Sengoku era. After reaching this stage, the work became relatively easier. She recalled that the 5th month of 1565 marked the Iroku incident, something her grandfather had once mentioned. Agriculture, she remembered, was a constant battle against nature. That understanding settled in as she anticipated the next challenge, pest control. Her attention was drawn to a deer wandering near the trees. Japanese deer, widespread even beyond Japan, were among the most destructive pests in both the past and present. They reproduced quickly and moved in herds from dawn until dusk. Concern set in as she saw damage already appearing on the plant. She questioned how many there might be. The men could not say for certain, estimating perhaps 100 or 200. Over the past 2 or 3 years, their numbers had suddenly increased. Hunters from the mountains had once kept them in check, but they had disappeared before anyone realized it. In the village, there had been one man skilled with a bow, but he had died of old age the previous year. The villagers looked to Shizuko to resolve the problem using her Nanban knowledge. She acknowledged the situation, considering that asking Nobunaga might lead to a solution, but hesitated at the thought of being seen as incapable if they relied on outside help too soon. She knew they would turn to that option only if they failed to find an answer themselves. She briefly imagined how simple it would be with modern tools like electric fences or the internet, but this was the Sengoku era. For now, she decided they would have to rely on a physical fence for protection. Some found the idea lacking any Nanban flair, yet the decision stood. Aside from the women handling their daily duties, everyone in the village took part in building the fence. At night, fires were lit, and watches were kept in turns to guard the fields. As the work continued, Shizuko began to consider taking the offensive. She approached Kinzo, the village's only blacksmith, and raised the possibility. Kinzo agreed to try. Even without a decisive weapon, they would not move forward unprepared. Preparations were made to set up near the trees, where the deer were known to gather. They concealed themselves in the nearby bushes and watched the deer from a distance. This moment presented an opportunity. Deer meat could help improve the villagers' food situation, which had long depended on limited resources. Using a modified straw sandal, they fashioned a sling capable of holding a stone. Slings were simple stone-flinging tools that had appeared across many regions throughout history, made from materials that varied by land and culture. Shizuko recalled past experiences practicing with similar tools, lessons learned the hard way, and judged that the skill would be useful now. She took aim and released the stone, but it missed. The deer reacted instantly and fled. The speed of its response made her question whether it had sensed the movement even before the stone was released. As they continued searching for another deer, a wolf appeared behind them. Its presence startled everyone. The wolf moved slowly toward Shizuko, close enough to raise immediate fear, then passed by without attacking. The encounter left her unsettled. A thriving deer population rarely coexisted with resident wolves, suggesting it had wandered in from elsewhere. If it were to remain, the deer damage might decrease over time, but for now, its presence only added uncertainty. Several days later, their approach changed. Instead of relying on sound alone, Shizuko used a staff sling with a longer range, incorporating a stick into the design. She launched another stone, confident in the adjustment. The throw missed again, but this time the deer ran directly into a prepared trap. They still had no clear sense of the herd size, so caution remained necessary. The trap was a leg-hold device, a hunting tool used since ancient times. When an animal stepped onto its center, a hook released, allowing the spring mechanism to clamp down with force. The impact alone was enough to render the animal unconscious, making this the moment to proceed. The villagers hesitated at the sight of it, but the purpose was clear. Shizuko intended for the meat to strengthen everyone's health. While meat-based diets had existed in Japan for centuries, laws banning the consumption of livestock had been established in 676. Even so, the practical need for nourishment now took priority, and the hunt moved forward under that reality. These laws had long been resented by the people. Stronger bodies meant better resistance to illness, greater stamina, and lower mortality. As Shizuko looked at the deer, she recalled the knives her grandfather had once given her. She also remembered his words about eating and taking a life. For life to exist, death was unavoidable. He had taught that it was natural to feel sadness or cruelty in the act, but foolish to condemn those who lived by that understanding. Her grandfather had also taught her how to prepare animals properly. The first step was bleeding. Once the deer's carotid artery was cut, its blood pressure would drop rapidly, and consciousness would fade. If any life remained, the heart would continue to beat briefly, forcing blood out even from the smallest capillaries. Afterward, the abdomen was opened and the internal organs removed. The carcass was then placed in a river or similar body of water, using the cold to slow decay while the remaining blood was washed out. After 2 to 3 hours, the body was taken from the water and skinned carefully, piece by piece. The removed organs were heavily infested with parasites, making them unsuitable for consumption, so they were set aside to be fermented and added to compost. Only the liver showed no trace of parasites, and the bile it contained was edible. Because the liver spoiled quickly, it was cooked immediately. Shizuko shared it with the others. Some hesitated before trying it, but once they did, the reaction was immediate. The taste surprised them, and they reached for more. The remaining portions of meat were prepared to be preserved with salt. Before the work could continue, the men suddenly stiffened. When Shizuko turned around, she saw the wolf again. This time, the situation felt dangerous, likely drawn by the scent of blood. Before anything could happen, the wolf collapsed to the ground. She approached cautiously and saw how thin it was. The sight raised questions. There was no sign of a pack. It may have lost its group and wandered until it could no longer find food. Acting without hesitation, she took a piece of cooked liver and offered it to the wolf. It ate and she followed by giving it water. As she stepped away, doubt set in over her own actions. The contradiction was clear even to herself. Still, when she looked back at the weakened animal, she could not abandon it. She returned to the village with the wolf, leaving the villagers stunned by what they saw. Shizuko carried the wolf back to the village, noting that it was calm and obedient. She offered it food, and as it ate, its condition visibly improved. By the next day, the fence was finally complete. The villagers could at last sleep through the night without constant worry. The immediate threat from the deer had been mitigated. One of the men approached Shizuko, curious about a structure she had set up. She explained that it was a Texas gate, designed to manage livestock, or in this case, the deer. Kinzo then appeared, holding a crossbow. Shizuko's expression brightened. She had confidence in his ability, and he had delivered. Crossbows, primarily a Western invention, were rare in Japan and far more accurate and lethal than a sling. They required less training than a bow, were safer to carry than firearms, and relatively simple to construct. Shizuko silently acknowledged Kinzo's work, impressed that he had followed her rough blueprint and vague instructions, and gave him a thumbs up. Kinzo, however, looked confused at the gesture. The villagers' attention shifted as a deer became trapped at the Texas gate, unable to move due to the design intended for even-toed ungulates. The wolf, stronger and healthier than before, moved with precision. Shizuko handed it some commands and, using the crossbow, aimed for another deer. One fell immediately, while others scattered, only for the wolf to leap and secure one with its jaws. With the combination of the crossbow and the wolf, the efficiency of their hunts increased dramatically. Villagers grew accustomed to eating meat, and the boost in nutrition visibly improved their energy. Farm work became easier, and productivity rose. Shizuko quietly noted that this progress brought her a step closer to her larger goals. When she returned from the hunt, she was met with an unexpected scene. The men of the village were bowing in her direction, calling her Great Chief. One offered her water, another offered to massage her shoulders, and a third asked if she had any phrase that needed mending. She was grateful for their thoughtfulness but found their reaction over the top, a result of the wolf's dramatic addition to their lives. Even in the Sengoku era, they had become unusually expressive. When someone urged her not to be so reserved, Shizuko simply told them to stop, amused and slightly exasperated by the display. In the 7th month of 1565, the heat was relentless. Any hope for free time vanished as work continued to pile up. Tasks like selling corn, stacking tomatoes, and artificially pollinating pumpkins left little room for rest. Despite this, the weather remained favorable, and the work proceeded relatively smoothly. Shizuko found her greatest relief in bathing, considering it a momentary escape from everything else. But that was just a distant dream for her now. She prepared a hot bath, blowing on the water before pouring it into the tub, only to realize the effort required for a lukewarm soak felt disproportionate. She approached Kinzu with the idea of creating a proper gomonburo. Kinzu explained that it was impossible, lacking both iron and the necessary technique. The difficulty only strengthened Shizuko's desire. Her attention drifted as she remembered hunting deer, noting her own lapse in concentration. Then, she spotted some fruits, soapberries. She recognized their potential as a natural soap substitute, their saponin content making them suitable for bathing. Clenching her fist, she became even more determined to enjoy a proper bath, questioning briefly if that desire was unreasonable. Nearby, she noticed a wolf. Its scrawny appearance initially made it easy to overlook, but she recognized it as a gray wolf, a species not native to Japan. Its presence suggested it might have been brought as a gift and escape. While walking, inspiration struck. She gathered everyone for a meeting, declaring construction a top priority. The goal was to improve cleanliness, prevent disease, relieve fatigue, and enhance overall health. Confident, she envisioned the project as perfect, something that could even make Oda Nobunaga reconsider her value. Unexpectedly, Nobunaga spoke, expressing interest in the plan. Surprised, Shizuko immediately bowed in apology, her tone overly deferential as she pleaded for forgiveness. Nobunaga instructed her to raise her head, explaining that he had received a report from Yashinari about her unusual construction. He requested that she show him her work. Upon entering the bathhouse, Shizuko explained that it was an onsen. Using a series of wooden cylinders, they had managed to draw hot water from a nearby source. On its way, the water passed through a simple filtration system. Before she could finish, Nobunaga interrupted, expressing his eagerness to try it. Shizuko hesitated, noting that it had only just been completed and remained untested. Nobunaga insisted, and she smiled, realizing the rumors of his curiosity were true. During the Sengoku era, baths submerged in hot water were uncommon. Steam baths or saunas were more typical. Figures like Takeda Shingen and Yusuji Kenshin had access to hot springs, but only a select few were permitted entry. In contrast, the Edo period would later popularize hot water bathing, especially open-air baths for the general populace. Shizuko wondered if proper practice required cleansing the body before entering. Suddenly, Nobunaga removed his clothes and entered the bath. He instructed Shizuko to begin the cleansing, prompting her immediate compliance. Observing his form, she noted the precision and strength in his musculature, evidence of disciplined training. He questioned the foam in the water, and she explained that it came from powdered soapberries, capable of removing oil and leaving the skin refreshed. The thought struck her quietly. She was washing the back of the demon king of the sixth heaven himself. As Nobunaga relaxed in the warm water, Shizuko watched, anticipation growing. He called the bathhouse a paradise. Their conversation shifted to her past. When asked about leaving Nanbien society, she explained it had been recent, though she was unsure of its exact location relative to Hinamoto. Nobunaga instructed her to report any discoveries immediately, and she agreed. Shizuko speculated that he might be considering foreign trade. Nobunaga praised the onsen again, granting her permission to use it freely. She compared him in her mind to Takeda Toru Harunobu, who had allowed his subordinates access to hot springs once completed. The moment was interrupted when Nobunaga suddenly stood, eyes sharp with anger. He questioned her integrity, suggesting that even if she were a spy, her actions bordered on foolishness. Shizuko immediately denied the claim, insisting it had been an accident and merely overheard. Nobunaga then instructed her to speak openly about what she knew of Takeda. Shizuko decided to keep her explanation brief, hoping to avoid complicating matters. She began with Takeda Tokuikan Shingen, eldest son of Takeda Nobutara and the 19th generation head of the Takeda clan. She recounted his campaigns, noting that in the Battle of Kawajima against Nagao Kagetora of Echigo Province, he had nearly subjugated Shinano. She explained his establishment of the Koshukan, a system of gold coins, and how he adopted mining and refining techniques from Namban imports to produce large amounts of gold, which were then allocated to flood control and military projects. In Kafu, she mentioned, it had taken 19 years to build an embarkation system that redirected river flows and enabled land reclamation. Nobunaga interrupted, calling her an idiot and questioning why she had gotten so absorbed in the details. He admitted he did not know if she was a spy from Namban or elsewhere, but he suggested it might be a waste to have her confined to farm work. Before leaving, he made his expectations clear. Her talents were to serve only his benefit, and the moment she left him would be the moment she faced death. The weight of his words left Shizuko terrified. Even so, she realized that few other warlords would have granted patronage to a woman of unknown lineage. Perhaps she could endure his strictness. Despite being the warlord she least wanted to serve, she might have been fortunate in other ways. Before departing, Nobunaga remarked that the harvest season was approaching. Shizuko acknowledged this, and he expressed anticipation for it. Later that day, she returned to the bathhouse, her expression one of quiet satisfaction. She resolved that starting tomorrow, she would devote herself fully to her work. Waiting for Nobunaga, she intended to accomplish her mission without fail. For months had passed since Shizuko arrived at the village. Though challenges, both large and small, continued to arise, she had managed to survive by working alongside the villagers. In this era of constant conflict, the efforts of the past months had finally borne fruit. The fields now yielded a bountiful harvest. It had been difficult, but the results brought her a quiet satisfaction. The remaining question was whether Nobunaga would approve. Shizuko called Tagasaku and Nasaku, signaling that it was time to set out. Both men responded with thumbs up, showing their readiness. Even with their harvest, uncertainty lingered. Would Nobunaga understand why there was no rice? In these times, rice was a precious commodity, carefully distributed to retainers and soldiers alike. The amount of rice a lord could secure was no small matter. Sadly, due to the many battles fought during winter, the farmers have been unable to plant rice properly. Finally, they arrived at the palace. Later that day, Shizuko bowed before Nobunaga and the gathered officials. Nobunaga acknowledged that she had come to present the fruits of her labor, and instructed her to raise her head and reveal her accomplishments. A subtle tension coursed through her, but she complied and entered the room with her subordinates. The officials reacted with surprise as they took in the display. Rows of tomatoes, sweet corn, and large pumpkins filled the space, accompanied by prepared dishes made from the harvest. Shizuko explained that these dishes had been prepared using the crops, inviting them to sample the result. She noted Nobunaga's indifferent expression, aware that his interest in food was minimal, yet hoping for some approval. The presentation included pumpkin and deer meat cooked in miso, boiled corn, sweet potatoes, miso onigiri, and salted tomatoes. Nobunaga's eyes widened as he looked at the food, clearly intrigued. One official asked whether a food taster should be brought in, but another answered that Nobunaga himself had said it was unnecessary. Without hesitation, Nobunaga tried the pumpkin. All the officials watched him closely, waiting for his reaction, while Shizuko stood quietly, hoping he would like it. After taking a bite, Nobunaga's expression suddenly grew serious. The room tightened with tension, and unease spread among those present, unsure of what would happen next. Some officials panicked and accused Shizuko of poisoning him. Startled and confused, She could only stare back in shock. Nobunaga quickly raised his voice and silenced them. Holding the piece of pumpkin, he explained that he had never experienced such a texture before. Beneath its gentle sweetness was a chewy quality that was difficult to describe. He spoke with interest, praising the ingredients from Namban and their unique way of cooking as truly remarkable. A smile appeared on his face. Seeing this, Shizuko felt a wave of relief and quietly thanked him. But Nobunaga's smile soon faded, and his expression turned serious once more. He asked why there was no rice. Shizuko met his gaze, understanding the weight of his question. He acknowledged that she must have had a reason. Shizuko explained that while the Nanban seeds had ensured a high chance of success for the task he had assigned, the village's limited manpower meant that cultivating rice alongside other crops would have created problems. She affirmed her awareness of rice's importance, yet expressed confidence that what they presented that day held value even greater than rice. The officials murmured in disbelief, one declaring it impossible, another calling it ridiculous. Nobunaga, however, remained silent, watching her closely, waiting for further explanation. Shizuko requested permission to present an idea she had been developing, one that she called Fukoku Kyuhei. Nobunaga's eyes widened in surprise at the mention. She explained that it was a policy aimed at nurturing the economy while reinforcing military power, a philosophy of creating a rich country with a strong army. It focused on developing national industry alongside military strength, a concept that had its origins in the Eastern Zhou dynasty and later appeared in Japan at the end of the Edo period, intended to counter foreign influence. Shizuko emphasized that strengthening the country required stable infrastructure to support the lives of commoners, something the current supplies fell short of providing. The crops presented that day were resilient against pests and disease, with sweet potatoes particularly notable for their ability to thrive in infertile soil, making them invaluable when rice might fail. Their high nutritional value promised to reduce child mortality caused by malnutrition, leading to a steady increase in both the labor force and soldiers. In an era where infant and child mortality rates reached 50%, such improvements could have profound effect. She continued that these methods could enhance both yields and nutrition, creating a foundation for a prosperous nation. Population growth would supply more soldiers, contributing to a strong military. She noted that no state within present-day Hinamoto had implemented such a strategy and expressed her conviction that this approach offered the shortest path toward unifying the country. Nobunaga's eyes widened further, impressed by the depth of her thinking. He acknowledged her thorough consideration of agriculture and recognized the full scope of her capabilities. He declared the plan magnificent, affirming that she had successfully accomplished the task. Shizuko expressed her gratitude, her excitement barely contained. Nobunaga then summoned Saru and instructed him to gather 50 farmers immediately, signaling the beginning of putting her plan into action. Shizuko noticed the man standing nearby and realized he was Toyotomi, though at this time, he was still known as Kinoshita to Kichir. Nobunaga referred to him as Saru, yet his face bore little resemblance to a monkey. Nobunaga then called Shizuko forward and announced that he would grant her a new territory. She was stunned by the declaration. Soon after, she began establishing a large base of operations, laying the foundation for her future plans. Later, Nobunaga and Shizuko surveyed the surrounding land. He asked for her opinion on the country, and she pointed out that if the ongoing conflicts between states persisted, everything would inevitably fall into ruin. Nobunaga, his expression serious, emphasized the urgency of reuniting the country. Shizuko watched him closely as he spoke. He explained that if they could succeed in unifying the nation, they would surpass other powers like the Ming and the Nanban, bringing prosperity and influence to their land. Shizuko quietly understood the unspoken truth behind his ambition. She knew that Nobunaga would likely never see the unification he dreamed of. Treachery and fate would cut his life short before his goal was realized. In that moment, she resolved to remember not the historical figure of Nobunaga, but the man before her, the life he led, his intentions, and his will. Nobunaga then told her that he would send rewards for her recent accomplishments and invited her to state her wish. Shizuko smiled, a mixture of gratitude and determination reflected in her expression. By the 10th month of 1565, the first roasted sweet potatoes were ready. Shizuko encouraged everyone to take one, and the villagers raised their hands, holding the potatoes with pride. They celebrated their success together, eating, drinking, and enjoying the moment to their heart's content. Smiles lit their faces, a reflection of genuine happiness earned through hard work. The satisfaction of celebrating shared achievement was unmistakable. Shizuko recalled when Nobunaga had asked her to state her wish. She had smiled and told him that she already had it. The new land he had granted her was reward enough. When she first arrived in this era, everything had been uncertain, but now, standing in the open fields she could call her own, she felt a profound sense of accomplishment. She turned to Nobunaga and assured him that next year, their harvest would be so abundant that he would be astonished by the rice they would present. Nobunaga smiled at her, noting her confidence. Shizuko knew that one day she would return to her own time. Until that day arrived, she resolved to move forward at full speed, embracing this era with determination and purpose. Approximately 1 year had passed since Shizuko's arrival in the Sengoku era. Along with a newly granted plot of land, additional workers were assigned to her, and as part of her reward, she was given a large estate. A young maid stepped forward, bowed, and introduced herself as Aya. Shizuko reacted with surprise at learning that the girl was to serve as her handmaid. Morisanza confirmed it without elaboration. Aya offered her service, asking to be informed of any needs. Shizuko returned the bow and greeted her politely, while Morisanza observed the exchange in silence. Aya hesitated, noting that this was the first time anyone of status had bowed to her. Shizuko appeared confused by the reaction. Morisanza dismissed it simply, remarking that such behavior was characteristic of Shizuko Dano. Shizuko apologized without understanding the weight of the gesture. Handmaidens were women who remained close to those of high status, performing menial tasks in service to them. Male servants were known as pages. Pages, in particular, were expected to be educated, well-mannered, and prepared to give their lives for their masters. During times of war, they often served as personal bodyguard. Morisanza informed Aya that from that day onward, she was to devote herself entirely to assisting Shizuko Dano. Aya pledged her loyalty fully, declaring her resolve to be worthy of serving even at the cost of her life. Shizuko responded with a smile, impressed by the resolve. Morisanza then presented another item, explaining that it came from the Lord. Shizuko examined it, initially assuming it to be a letter, before recognizing the mark upon it. She was surprised to see a Chilan signature. Kao were stylized signatures commonly used during the era and did not always reflect a person's real name. Unlike the black and red seals reserved for official documents, Kao were typically used for personal matters or communications directed toward those of lower rank. Written communication required scribes, and Nobunaga himself was known to employ several dedicated amanuenses. Shizuko read the contents and learned that her village was ordered to deliver 25 bales of rice. After informing everyone of the message, shock spread among the workers. The number was far beyond what they believed possible. With the increase in people and land, even a good harvest would make producing half that amount nearly unattainable. Shizuko quietly reflected on the demand, finding it entirely in line with Nobunaga's reputation for being unreasonable. The task ahead was clearly difficult. Shizuko allowed herself a faint smile as she considered how the outcome might change if she applied techniques from another era. The workers noticed the expression on her face, and a quiet excitement spread through the group simply from seeing their chief smile. Shizuko gathered everyone and explained that they would begin by sorting the unhusked seeds using a flotation method. The workers reacted with visible confusion. She proceeded to outline the process, explaining that the seeds would be placed into a solution mixed at a ratio of 1 part salt to 16 parts water. In this solution, only the heavier seeds would sink. These sinking seeds contained higher amounts of endosperm, allowing them to take root properly and achieve a higher germination rate. She explained that this technique had been developed during the Meiji era and was known to increase harvest yields by more than 10%. After selection, the seeds would be left to absorb water for 10 minutes. Care had to be taken with temperature, as excessive warmth could cause premature budding, so the process would be carried out in the shade. Some of the workers questioned the need for such a troublesome method and felt it would be faster to plant immediately. Shizuko looked across the group, recognizing that this approach was unfamiliar to all of them. Before tension could rise, one worker stepped in and urged everyone to remain calm and trust their village chief. His confidence in her was clear, and his reassurance quickly spread through the group. The workers responded with renewed unity, though the newer members, along with Aya, remained puzzled by the exchange. With the seeds set aside, preparation of the paddy fields began. During winter, the fields had been plowed, and the footpaths between them carefully maintained. The soil was then lightly raked, water added, and after several days, the final steps were completed by flattening the surface and scattering rice husk. Despite the increase in farmers, the cultivated land had expanded even more, making the work physically demanding. Some suggested that sowing should begin as soon as possible, but Shizuko firmly rejected the idea of taking shortcuts. She emphasized that precision at this stage was essential, even if the methods seemed unfamiliar. The farmers listened, though many struggled to grasp the reasoning. 1 month after the saltwater selection, the seedlings had grown strong enough for transplanting. Even then, random planting was not permitted. During the winter, Shizuko had prepared a rolling frame for this exact purpose. She demonstrated its use, rolling it across the field to mark consistent spacing. One farmer watched, convinced she was doing something strange once again. She then directed them to plant the rice precisely at the crossing points marked by the frame, setting the next phase of cultivation into motion. The rice was planted in regular rows. This method, first introduced during the Meiji era, focused on equal spacing rather than random distribution. With consistent gaps between plants, sunlight reached more evenly, ventilation improved, and the removal of weeds became easier. These conditions reduced harmful effects and significantly increased the amount of rice that could be harvested. Over time, this approach became the standard for rice cultivation. Even after the transplanting was complete, Shizuko did not allow herself to rest. She visited the Kinzu shop to check on a request she had made earlier. The work was proving difficult, but she showed confidence in Kinzu's abilities and urged him to complete it quickly. Kinzu reacted with visible strain, noting the imbalance between the request and the effort required, yet continued with the task. As Shizuko walked on, she reflected on the recent changes around the village. Thanks to Whitman, the number of vermin had dropped significantly. Even so, securing a stable source of protein for the villagers remained an unresolved issue. Hunting would have been far more efficient with Whitman present, but it was mating season, and he was likely away in search of a partner. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of deer moving through the bushes. She immediately prepared her crossbow. Before she could act, a massive boar burst into view. She noticed injuries on its feet as it charged straight toward her. Shizuko took aim and fired, but the bolt failed to stop the animal. The boar closed the distance and lunged at her. She froze in panic and shut her eyes. At the last moment, a wolf leapt in and sank its fangs into the boar. Shizuko opened her eyes to see Whitman standing there, accompanied by another wolf. The danger passed as quickly as it had appeared. Shizuko returned to the farm soon after. The atmosphere had shifted. The villagers were in a state of panic, their attention drawn to the sudden disturbance and her abrupt return. The villagers froze when they saw Shizuko return accompanied by 2 wolves. Shock spread across their faces, and some struggled to accept that even one had already become part of daily life, let alone another. The sight alone unsettled the group, though no one moved to interfere. Work resumed soon after. The next task was weeding. The farmers reacted with weary acceptance, already imagining the strain on their backs. Even so, the benefits of the planting method became clear. With the rice arranged in regular rows, moving between plants and removing weeds was far easier than before. Shizuko stopped them before they began in earnest and revealed another tool. It was the rotary weeding machine completed by Kinzu. This device, also developed during the Meiji era, removed weeds while simultaneously stirring the soil. The improvement in efficiency was immediate. As the soil was turned, trapped toxic gases were released, allowing oxygen to circulate in their place. The farmers took turns using the tool, their reactions shifting from doubt to amazement. The work progressed faster than expected. This intertillage weeding was performed twice every 10 days. Even with the machine, the labor remained demanding. Beyond weeding, they continued removing harmful insects and carefully adjusting the water levels of the paddies to maintain stable growing conditions. June passed under steady effort. In July, Whitman's companion gave birth to 5 cubs, adding new life to the village surroundings. By August, the farmers gathered at the edge of the fields and stared in disbelief. An old acquaintance of Shizuko raised a familiar gesture toward the others, reinforcing the trust he had spoken of before. The fields before them were overflowing with rice. None of them had ever seen a harvest like this. Shizuko turned to Aya and asked for her thoughts. Aya responded with reserved admiration. Shizuko studied her reaction and found it unexpectedly restrained. Aya, however, reflected on how every plan carried out by Shizuko had been something unseen and unprecedented. The farmers surrounded Shizuko with praise, their voices filled with awe. Watching from her place beside Shizuko, Aya felt a quiet resolve settle within her. What she once believed to be hidden power from distant lands now seemed to belong entirely to Shizuko herself. Aya accepted her role without hesitation, determined to fulfill the duty entrusted to her, regardless of the cost. September 1566 marked a period when Nobunaga had surrounded Mino and was locked in a prolonged struggle against Saito Tatsuoki. Far from the battlefield, life in Shizuko's village continued at a steady pace, with the villagers fully engaged in the rice harvest. During this time, Shizuko introduced a human-powered harvester. The tool allowed work that was normally done while bent over to be performed in an upright position. Its design traced its origins to a public contest held during the Second World War, created to address labor shortages, after which multiple variations were developed, including models capable of binding harvested rice. The version constructed by Kinzo was limited to basic harvesting, yet even so, work efficiency increased dramatically and the burden on the villagers was clearly reduced. Yoshinari acknowledged the results of the harvest and recognized the scale of what had been accomplished. Shizuko attributed the success to the collective effort of the villagers rather than her own contribution. At the same time, she considered the possibility that Yoshinari's visit was connected to the Lord's arbitrary decisions. Yoshinari then drew attention to a field filled with tall, bamboo-like plants and questioned their nature. Shizuko reacted with surprise as they made their way to the location. Upon arrival, she identified the plants as sugarcane. She quietly shared additional information with Yoshinari, leaving him visibly taken aback by what he learned. Yoshinari struggled to believe that these plants could be transformed into sugar. To demonstrate, Shizuko cut a stalk and tasted it herself before offering it to him. The sweetness was unmistakable, and his reaction reflected genuine astonishment. Sugar had first come to Japan from China during the Nara period and was initially used as medicine. Although it later found its way into cooking, it remained a rare and valuable commodity due to its limited import and the absence of domestic production. Yoshinari looked at Shizuko with renewed attention, realizing that she was capable of producing even something as extraordinary as this. Her abilities felt increasingly difficult to measure. Shizuko then turned the conversation toward Yoshinari's true concerns. When he spoke frankly, the subject shifted to his domestic affairs, leaving Shizuko visibly shaken by what she learned. Yoshinari went on to address the campaign to conquer Mino and the Lord's intention to strengthen the foundations of the country through this effort. In addition to this, Yoshinari sought her counsel in matters of politics and finance. He acknowledged that placing a woman in charge of domestic affairs was almost unheard of, yet noted that such a decision was entirely characteristic of their lord. Shizuko understood that this was not truly a request. The decision had already been made. She sensed that refusal was never part of the equation. The scene then shifted to Nobunaga, who was suffering from stomach pain. Meanwhile, in the village, the harvest process moved steadily forward. After harvesting, the rice was bound, dried, threshed, hulled, and milled. Once completed, it was packed into bales, the total count easily surpassing the target of 25. Shizuko instructed that the results be presented, and her group began their journey to Nobunaga's palace. Standing before the palace, Shizuko felt the familiar tension return. Inside the waiting room, she reassured herself that the harvest goal had been exceeded and that there should be no issue. Yet her thoughts kept circling back to the matter of domestic affairs, searching for a way to avoid the responsibility. Before she could settle on anything, the sound of approaching footsteps reached the room. The door opened abruptly, the force of it suggesting someone entering in anger. Shizuko was caught off guard as Nobunaga struck her on the head and reprimanded her harshly. He berated her for being careless and demanded that she send notice in advance if she intended to deliver such abnormal bales. He seized her clothing as she struggled to grasp what was happening and directed her attention to the stacked rice bales. The issue lay in their size. While a standard 60-kilogram bale would later be established in the Meiji era, bale weights in this period varied by region and time, with 30 kilograms being typical. Although Shizuko had been receiving 30-kilogram bales as her stipend, she had unknowingly packed the harvest into 60-kilogram bales out of habit learned from her grandfather. The villagers, having grown accustomed to following her instructions without question, had carried out the work without protest. In hindsight, she recalled their subtle hesitation, as if they had wanted to point something out. Nobunaga continued his outburst, pointing out that the existing warehouses would not be able to accommodate this mistake. He demanded to know the total number of bales and how many warehouses would be required, pressing for an immediate answer. Shizuko apologized and reported that she had brought 200 bales, some of which had already been moved into the warehouses. She then asked how many standard bales a single warehouse could hold. Upon hearing that the capacity was 200, she requested a brief moment and began calculating. Using the stick she always carried, she drew figures into the ground and worked through the numbers. Nobunaga watched in confusion as she continued, and the workers nearby shared the same uncertainty. After finishing, she concluded that 3 additional warehouses would be sufficient. Nobunaga accepted her conclusion, stated that he would handle the remaining arrangements, and dismissed her. Shizuko left in a state of quiet confusion. Nobunaga's gaze lingered on the marks left on the ground where she had completed the simple calculation. Inside Nobunaga's chamber, he and his officials discussed what they had witnessed. He identified what she had done as arithmetic and remarked on the unexpected nature of such ability. Morisanza agreed, describing it as truly astonishing. In this era, arithmetic was largely unknown outside of merchants and the upper class, including figures like Nobunaga himself. More advanced methods were treated as confidential hereditary knowledge, referred to as the way of calculation. Nobunaga asked whether anything had been uncovered about Shizuko's background. The officials reported that not a single detail about her origins could be found. He then asked about the Ayanokoji clan, only to be told that there were no records of a female child like Shizuko being born into that family. Morisanza noted that for someone so clearly gifted to have remained completely unheard of was highly unusual. Another official raised the possibility that she might be from Namban lands. Nobunaga returned to the matter of the harvest, remarking on how unsettling the scale of it was. 200 of those oversized bales amounted to roughly 400 standard bales, all produced by only 100 villagers. He stated that the time would come when her talents would be put to use beyond agriculture and domestic management. However, another official cautioned that placing trust in someone unwilling to speak of their origins could eventually lead to trouble. Morisanza agreed with the concern, noting that excessive trust would be unwise, though he personally believed she was far too straightforward to be a spy. Nobunaga shared that view, remarking that the woman often seemed to have her head in the clouds. At the same time, he stated that he would not be able to tolerate a situation where she was deceived by an enemy agent and defected as a result. That risk was one of the reasons he had chosen to promote her, ensuring she understood the weight of her position. Still, he acknowledged that Kazumasu's caution was valid. Until her origins were clarified, she would need to be handled carefully. Nobunaga added that he had already put a form of insurance in place. Later that day, Shizuko stood absent-mindedly when one of the workers reported that the orders had been carried out without issue. She acknowledged the result and began to walk away, her thoughts returning to the matter of domestic affairs. She reflected that she may have altered the course of agriculture, if only slightly, but that had been done simply to prevent the villagers from starving. Even so, she sensed that her involvement would not end there. She understood that refusal was not an option, yet she still could not fully steel herself to accept it. Whitman appeared, catching her by surprise, and she noticed him carrying her bag. Inside it was the ancient to modern weapons catalog. A faint laugh escaped her as she looked at it, thinking that perhaps, in time, circumstances might somehow settle themselves. At that moment, she noticed Aya watching her quietly from a distance. October 1566. Shizuko set her resolve. Aya reported that Shizuko had requested Yoshinari to acquire a specific item. Morisanza questioned the purpose behind it. Aya conveyed that Shizuko had stated the details could not be disclosed, as it would be troublesome if spies learned of it. The results would take 2 to 3 years to appear. Aya accepted this and confirmed the delivery would be arranged. Morisanza then asked whether she had uncovered anything else. Aya reported that there was nothing in particular. Morisanza expressed his reliance on her, and Aya acknowledged this before returning to Shizuko's residence. At Shizuko's house, Aya entered her room to look for her. She noticed a box and recalled it as the container for Shizuko's important belongings, along with the unusual bow kept there. Before she could approach it, 2 wolves suddenly appeared. One was Whitman, accompanied by his partner. Aya froze at the sight. She then noticed Whitman lying calmly in the room with his mate and their cubs. Shizuko entered soon after. Aya indicated that she had returned from delivering the request. Shizuko expressed her gratitude and acknowledged the help she had received, then offered Aya a potato. Aya interpreted it as an urgent order. Shizuko reacted in surprise, clarifying the misunderstanding through her expression and tone. Aya declined for the moment and left the room. Shizuko watched her go and briefly wondered whether Aya held any resentment toward her. The seeds Shizuko had brought into this era were largely purebred plants. These were varieties with traits maintained consistently over multiple generations, many of them developed through selective breeding practiced by Shizuko's grandfather. That year as well, Shizuko guided the cultivation of various crops toward a plentiful harvest. Alongside this, she had begun several side projects, including beekeeping, silkworm breeding, and poultry egg farming. The season passed under clear skies, with the weather remaining gentle and favorable. Shizuko and Aya ventured into the nearby forest, moving with quiet purpose. Shizuko noticed Aya's fatigue and asked if she was all right. Aya brushed it off, insisting there was no need to worry. Shizuko regarded her silently, and then Aya reminded her of the task at hand. They were there to gather mushrooms. Curiosity prompted her to ask exactly what they were looking for. Shizuko listed Shimeji, Namiko, and Maitake, adding that she had succeeded in cultivating shiitake as well. Aya froze in surprise, questioning whether shiitake could truly be cultivated. Shizuko gave a small smile, explaining that it was straightforward in theory, though last year's attempt had ended in failure. Shizuko pointed toward a specific area, and Aya's eyes widened in astonishment. Before her lay a vast mushroom farm, brimming with shiitake, shimeji, and namiko in abundance. The sheer scale made her almost tremble. She asked Shizuko what she intended to do with so many mushrooms. Shizuko answered casually, to eat them, and then added that drying them beforehand would enhance their flavor for soup stock. Aya could hardly believe it, stunned by both the scale of the harvest and the practical knowledge behind it. In this era, shiitake were rare and considered a luxury, long before the methods of cultivation became widespread in the 20th century. They were an essential component of Buddhist cuisine, yet in the wild, they grew only in small numbers. Aya noted that 15 can, about 56 kilograms, would have been enough to buy a castle, leaving Shizuko shocked. She asked about matsutake next, and Aya wondered aloud whether shimeji might not taste better. Shizuko paused, struck by the thought. In this period, few appreciated matsutake's flavor, and it was generally regarded as far inferior to shiitake. Shizuko admitted that the information caught her off guard, prompting Aya to quietly question the kind of environment Shizuko had grown up in. Aya reminded herself to keep a careful eye on Shizuko as they worked. Over time, they gathered a substantial harvest, and Shizuko's delight was evident as she admired the mushrooms they had collected. Aya watched her quietly, curiosity prompting her to ask where Shizuko had learned such cultivation technique. Shizuko explained that a relative, a mushroom scientist, had shared what he knew, and that her grandfather's connections had exposed her to many experts, giving her the chance to learn a wide range of skills. These experiences had even allowed her to enroll directly in a high school under the Ministry of Agriculture, Forestry, and Fisheries. Aya listened, surprised by the depth and breadth of Shizuko's knowledge. Shizuko warned Aya to watch her footing, but moments later Aya slipped and fell. Shizuko rushed to her side, concerned as Aya suffered bruises on her leg. Aya reassured her she was fine, though she fretted more over the mushrooms. She nearly fell again, but Shizuko steadied her. Aya tried to insist she could manage, yet stumbled once more. Shizuko examined the leg, noting the wound was shallow. She set down a basket of mushrooms and insisted on carrying Aya back before the sun set. Aya hesitated, feeling guilty about troubling her, but Shizuko's gentle insistence, paired with a smile, left no room for refusal. Aya thought of Shizuko as enigmatic, commanding yet kind, and allowed herself to be carried, along with the mushrooms they had collected. She offered her apologies, but Shizuko dismissed them, saying it was enjoyable, as if she suddenly had a little sister. Aya felt a quiet relief wash over her as they made their way back to the farm. A few days later, Aya was sweeping outside when Shizuko returned, animated with excitement. She had picked a large batch of persimmons and offered some to Aya. Aya, momentarily taken aback, reminded herself not to let personal feelings interfere with her mission. Shizuko appeared puzzled, but Aya framed her response carefully, following Shizuko's request as an order. Shizuko noted that Aya's manners remained overly formal, and Aya acknowledged this with polite thanks, maintaining the careful balance between duty and the small moments of warmth that had begun to form between them.